Hello and welcome to this fourth video clip about the ancient Greek polis or city-states. Today we will again be focusing on the differences between the Greek city-states and talk a little bit about two wars that have been fought out between city-states and also between the Greek city-states on the one hand and the Persians on the other hand. So please remember that these distinctive characteristics that you see here on top of this screen are very important to understand. And when it comes to Greek city-states, I thought it would be best fit to use this distinctive characteristic to sort of illustrate what happened. This is a short recap of what we have been dealing with in previous movies and previous lessons. The whole idea of differences between polis or polis in singular is because of the geography of Greece. So you see all these mountains, these inlets, these islands, all these polis with their surrounding farmland together, these little city-states, develop their own way of living. And we have also seen that there's lots of them, about around 150, and in earlier and later times it's even more or less, depends on which area you look at. But famous examples are Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and so on. Today we will be focusing mostly on Sparta because we have been dealing with the golden age of Athens, with its culture and development of scientific thinking. But today we will sort of see what happened in Sparta in their sort of golden time. Well, if you make a comparison between those two polis, you see that it's very sort of logical to sort of think in black and white, so that one was all about culture and the other was all about war. And of course, that's not entirely true. There were sort of these little differences. But if you take a look at it all together, you could say that life in Athens was in itself, if you are a citizen and if you are no slave, free and open. You could develop, you could participate in the democracy, you could practice yourself in speaking and talking in Olympics and so on. The life in Sparta, on the other hand, was kind of harsh. And again, please note that this is sort of simplified a bit. But in general, you could say that Spartans were taught to be strong and to be non-forgiving and to be very fierce and to train their body and to fight for their polis. So it was not about democracy or having a say or making beautiful structures or buildings or sculptures. It was all about keeping the fight up, so to say. You see here these pictures sort of illustrate this. So why is that? So early in the history, I think we have sort of shortly mentioned this earlier on, but the Spartans conquered land around their city. They also had the problem of overpopulation, and they thought, okay, we're not going to colonize, we're just going to conquer the area around us. And these people were called the Messenians, and they were sort of enslaved, so they were made into slaves, which the Spartans called helots, and they were forced to work on the land to provide food for them. So this meant that the Spartans had to keep a strong army to control all of these Messenians and to control the helots. It was very important that there would be no rebellion or that the helots would sort of decide for their own what they would do. No, the helots had to be kept in check. And that's one of the origins where Spartans got their sort of strong idea of fighting from. So there's even a very famous quote from an ancient historian who researched the ancient times that says, Sparta was more an army with a state than a state with an army. So the whole of the army was the center of a Spartan vision, and it was all about the fight and developing a good army, choosing the best soldiers, competition between them and so on. Well, a few pictures, you know these very famous pictures probably from movies and stuff like that. This is one from, I think, 300, the movie 300, where you see the Spartans having a strong army. So, that meant that Sparta was all in all very hierarchical, so there was no sort of equality between all the people. The Spartans would be the aristocrats, they would be, sort of say, the better people, and they would devote all their time in the army. So that meant that boys, because women of course were not allowed in the army, that was the thinking between men and women was very strict in those days. Boys left home at 7 years old and they would receive military training typically until they were 20. So this was a very strict system, and they were taught to bear pain, hardship, to kill, to show no mercy, take punishment in silence. There's all sorts of examples of this. So one famous story is that as a Spartan boy, you were sort of encouraged to steal and to cheat, and you would only be punished for that if you were caught. So it was all about strengthening yourself and making yourself hard and ready for battle, so to say. Spartan women, on the other hand, they were not considered inferior or any such thing. They were trained to exercise, have strong, healthy children. So this very famous statue that I want to focus on for a bit shows a Spartan woman, which is very fit and very lean and very well equipped also to go into battle if needed, but specifically to bear strong, healthy children. And the Spartans typically did not mingle with other Greeks, nor had interest in trade or arts. They were pretty much a city-state on their own. They had a feeling of superiority, but that was sort of logical because their army was superior. It was by far the most well-trained, the strongest land army of all the Greek city-states. However, on sea, as we are going to see, the Athenians were superior. So, an aristocracy, there was a public assembly, but only nobles could propose a law in this public assembly, and they could only reject or accept the new law. So there was far less influence from the common people, if you want to call it that way, than, for example, in Athens. There were two kings. They both would lead a part of the army, so they would keep each other in check. It was also to prevent that one king would actually become a tyrant and take over all of Sparta. But that was the way that the Spartan sort of government worked. And again, it was very much an aristocracy where the Spartans were most important. Okay, we're going to focus on two wars in ancient Greek times. And first we start with the Persian Wars. These are very famous, and they are made famous a period of about 20 years because of the writings of the famous Greek historian Herodotus. He is seen as one of the first proper historians, actually. And here you see a map, and I won't explain all of it, but the interesting thing is that there were sort of three actual wars. The first one was was the reason for the whole of the war was that the Greek city-states, the Greek colonies actually on the shores of Ionia, which is now Turkey, sort of revolted against the Persians. So the belligerents in this war were the Persians, the Persian Empire, the whole of the huge Persian Empire against the Greek city-states. And again, the direct cause was the Greek colonies revolting against Persia. And in the first war, around 500, I have to say 492 BC, the Persians would sort of have a huge fleet, but that fleet sunk somewhere in the north of Macedonia. And because of that, the Persians were so mad that they started a new war in 490 and in 479. And the famous battles, specifically in the last war, so the war of 479 BC, were Marathon and Thermopylae, and Salamis is more of a sea battle. There's lots of interesting stories about this. So the Marathon is the place where the Greeks finally beat the land army, beat the Persians. And then a messenger was sent to Athens to tell him the good news, and he ran a distance of 41.95 kilometers, which nowadays, of course, is our marathon on the Olympics. In Thermopylae is the famous spot where 300 Spartans in a passage between the mountains held against, what is said to be hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million Persians. Of course, these stories are far exaggerated, but that's the whole of the idea of the Greeks telling the stories. They would probably have to had them spiced up and during each time it was told. So it's exactly the same way as it's been told. And the movies about this are actually quite nice. Salamis, same year as Thermopylae, is the point where the Persian fleet got beaten by the Athenians. So there was sort of a cooperation in this war. And this is actually the war against the Persians, the time when the Greeks are called Greek. So they are sort of one union of Greek city-states. Okay, that's the Persian Wars, very famous because of the writings of Herodotus. Here you see Salamis, by the way. These pictures are, I think, speak for themselves. The outcome is, in the end, that the Greek city-states win, and that's a huge victory because the Persian Empire was quite large and quite impressive. The other very famous war is the Peloponnesian War between 431 and 404 BC. These are important dates, by the way, so you need to know those. And this is an intern battle. You could call it a civil war if you see Greece as a unity, but it's between Sparta on the one hand, with its strong, very strong land army, and Athens with its strong sea army. There's leagues, sort of, they have their allies. Sparta has the Peloponnesian League, and Athens the Delian League. And the Delian League was called after Delos, which is, I hope you can see it in the center of this map. Delos was the rather small island where Athens famously kept its treasure. So it was the treasury of the whole league, so to say. And in this, well, a little over 25, 26 years of this war, you see that these polis are sort of fighting against each other, but in the end it leads to a Spartan army sieging Athens, and they struggle for power. It's simple, just who's the most important. And as you might have heard earlier, it also marks the end of the golden century of Athens, so Athens loses. And this is also the war in which the very famous statesman Pericles fights. He has his very famous eulogy here, his speech about the value of democracy, which is kept very well. And this war is written or described by Thucydides, another Greek ancient historian, in a similar way as Herodotus, very exact, and of course maybe not as scientific as we would do it right now as historians, but these two wars are written down very clearly so that we know actually quite a lot about it. You don't have to know that much about the battles in this war, about the exact people fighting in it, but the outcome is in the end that Sparta wins, and it marks again the end of the golden century of Athens. So Athens is burnt for a part, which happened quite more often actually. But after this you see that new people start to take power, and the whole idea of the Athenian democracy sort of vanishes for a while. Up until the moment that it's rediscovered by certain people. More about that later. That was about it. It's the end of the golden era of Athens, as I mentioned. So the Spartans take power, but again, not for long. Soon after you see that other people take over power, and specifically Alexander the Great. Maybe you've heard of the name. That will be in the next movie clip. Thank you for watching, and I hope you could find all the answers to the questions, to the note papers that you have found, and see you at the next movie. Bye bye.